The quiet hum of the quadcopter was drowned out by the joyful shouts of the children invited to Dee Dee's 12th birthday party. The parents of Dee Dee's 5 friends had brought them early, and now all 6 girls were playing in the yard, waiting to be told that the cake and ice cream were ready. I sighed as I thought about it. Our backyard. Yes, it had been our backyard until the divorce was finalized 2 months ago. Now it was just my backyard, except that it indirectly belonged to my son, 14-year-old Dylan, who was sitting on the patio watching everything with feigned indifference, and my daughter Diane, we call her Dee Dee, 11. Well, 12 as of today, hence the birthday. My little princess had only 1 year left before she became a teenager. God help me. We had survived Dylan's rite of passage, well for now. Now all I had left was to find a way to help Dee Dee navigate this minefield on her way to womanhood without guidance or help. Damn. This is a special day for Dee Dee. Her last birthday as a child before entering the dramatic, glamorous, and painful period of adolescence. I had already decided a few days earlier that I would not let the joy of this day be overshadowed by thoughts of that bitch Dee Dee, my ex-wife Donna. Instead, I focused on giving Dee Dee unforgettable moments and on preparing the entertainment I had organized with my friend and now partner in our exciting, and, by all accounts, lucrative, business venture, Nirmal Pradhan. Easy, Diz, I said to Nirmal, as we operated the remote-controlled lifting platforms with the tablets in our hands. Don't lower them too early. They might have time to hide, and we won't get the full effect. Just aim lower, above the back fence, and hit the light at the right moment, replied my friend of Indian descent. As soon as you distract them from the real threat, go ahead and shoot. During his 6 years in the U.S., he had almost lost the melodious rhythm of speech characteristic of the subcontinent. Moreover, he had lived in Tennessee for 4 of those 6 years, which had softened his English pronunciation and introduced words such as y'all into his everyday vocabulary. He sometimes even joked that in Knoxville, he learned that y'all is singular and all y'all is plural. 6 teenage girls celebrating a birthday were running around the backyard watching a quadcopter hovering above them. It made a soft buzzing sound, flew a short distance in one direction, then hovered again. The girls followed it, but it ended up underneath it. About 20 meters away, it moved in another direction and the girls rushed there. Underneath the quadcopter, flying 8 meters above them, the one we had named Enola Gay, was a round object wrapped in ribbons. We convinced the girls that it was an aerial piñata that would shower them with small candies at the right moment. We kept the other quadcopter, the one Diz and I had named E.T., out of sight for now. I was the only one who knew how to fly it, and at that moment it was turned off. It was quietly preparing for flight in a small clearing in the woods on the other side of our fence. I put down the tablet with the remote control and picked up a bottle of Budweiser Black Crown. Lately, I had been choosing this beer more and more often, as I felt like drinking a little more alcohol after the unpleasant events surrounding my divorce. But I wasn't planning on getting drunk today, as I had to drive later. I just liked the taste. So I limited myself to 2 glasses. I coughed, swallowing awkwardly because I was distracted for a moment by her appearance. I knew that Dee Dee had invited Donna, my ex-wife, to her party, but I was still upset to see her come out the back door onto the patio as if she owned the place. Still the arrogant queen who ruled over everyone who fell under her bad influence. She caught me off guard because I didn't hear her car pull up. I had to clear my throat a couple of times to get the beer out of my lungs that had accidentally gone down the wrong way when she distracted me for a split second. Donna still looked good, but not as stunning as she had a few months ago. Her shoulder-length hair, green eyes, and fantastic figure always made passers-by, if not stop, then at least slow down. Now she was still very attractive, but she had put on a little weight which I'm sure upset her greatly. The status of the most attractive woman, which she had earned at 15 and held for most of her life, was now in jeopardy. Putting the wrapped package on the table set aside for Dee Dee's gifts, she looked straight at me. At first, her face was expressionless, but then it quickly changed to a brief expression of delight, devoid of any emotion, followed by a momentary flash of sadness, and then a clear determination to enjoy the moment. She sighed, trying to put on a polite, friendly smile. "Glenn," was all she said as she approached me. "Donna," was all I replied, turning to our daughter and her friends. I made several successful attempts to relieve the tension that had crept into my body from her mere presence. She could still turn me on, but lately it was a different kind of excitement. I glanced at my watch and noticed that time was slipping away if I wasn't more careful. I put down my beer bottle and picked up the tablet remote. "Time to go, Diz," I said to my friend, who was standing a few feet away with the remote in his hands. Focused on controlling Enola Gay, I couldn't tell if he knew Donna was here, but I knew that, aside from finding her presence here slightly unpleasant, he didn't really care. "Okay," he replied, with a simple nod, maneuvering the Enola Gay to the back of the yard and closer to the fence. I picked up the tablet with the control panel and touched the spot that should remotely activate the ET. I didn't hear it come to life behind our yard fence, but I noticed that the system status indicator on the tablet showed that all systems were operational, as they say at NASA. While Diz moved the Enola Gay a little to distract the girls, I lifted the ET from the seat and moved it to a height where it could just fly over the trees on its way to our yard. On the inset screen in the lower left corner of the tablet, I could see what ET saw, thanks to a miniature camera that transmitted the signal via a carrier wave in the wireless frequency range to my controller. Using another remote control on the screen, I could remotely move the camera so that its field of view rotated 360 degrees on a gimbal mount, and even zoom in and out. But today, there was no need for that. Nor was there any need for the tablet's built-in remote recording function. The girls were so focused on Enola Gay that they didn't notice the alien coming down the hill, skirting the last trees on its way to our back fence. I heard Donna next to me take a deep breath in surprise when she saw the alien. She was about to shout a warning, but I shouted at her, "Don't make any noise." I didn't look at her, but I could feel that she was a little angry. I hadn't spoken a harsh word to her since the divorce proceedings began, and she wasn't used to being treated that way. I don't know what made her exhale instead of calling the girls and ruining the surprise. The determination in my voice, or her momentary surprise and indignation. All I know is that for her own reasons, she decided to keep quiet while I remotely guided the ET over the back fence and brought it closer to where the girls were gathered, but out of their sight. I pressed 2 points on the control screen in quick succession, activating the 2 ET functions needed to create the surprise. 2 very bright red and green strobe lights began to flash alternately as ET rose to a height greater than the tallest girl in the group. A split second later, a sound effect rang out. "Woo woo!" A loud signal sounded, imitating the roar of a police car. The girls screamed and turned around at the same time to see a frightening sight. 2 bright flashing strobe lights directly above them and behind them. In that moment of paralysis, I heard Diz say, "The bombs have been dropped." And when I looked up from my notebook, I saw Enola Gay drop the round object decorated with ribbons that was hanging beneath her. The object fell only a meter before a sudden explosion with a slight pop came from its core, and the object exploded over the girls' heads. Pieces of ribbon flew around them a few seconds after they were hit by a jet of water, forming a cone 6 meters in diameter as the plastic carbon dioxide inside the balloon exploded. As Enola Gay began to return to the patio toward Diz, I saw a rope with the remains of the explosive device hanging from the undercarriage. None of the bomb fragments had scattered enough to injure the girls. "Diz!" I heard Dee Dee shout, part indignant, part playful, as she turned and saw Diz and me laughing at them. I knew she was mostly reacting to the suddenness of the event Dee Dee and I had staged. The water spray from the balloon wasn't enough to ruin their clothes or, God forbid, their hairstyles. Dee Dee had already started stomping toward me to express her displeasure when I heard Donna next to me make a sound like she was about to throw up. Turning to her, I saw that Donna's eyes were wide open and her mouth was slightly ajar. She was clearly surprised, but there was something else. That something became obvious when she turned to me with an expression of rage and contempt on her face. "It's you, you bastard," she whispered. Then she came up to me and slapped me across the face. It was a good thing I didn't hit the tablet screen when I recoiled from her blow, or I might have broken ET or hit one of the girls when it moved. But ET just stayed where it was. She gathered her strength and said, "You know, sometimes you can be a real son of a bitch." Not known for my wit or quick thinking, I surprised myself by responding fairly quickly. "You mean not being a real Class A slut who cheats on me? Everywhere?" Donna blushed and froze, considering how to repeat the slap she had received a minute ago. But when Dee Dee came up to me and hugged me around the waist, Donna pulled herself together and crouched down slightly in front of Dee Dee, so that her face was level with our daughter's. "Happy birthday, sweetie." She reached out to touch Dee Dee's shoulder, and my daughter let go of me, walked over to her mother, and hugged her around the waist. "Donna," Though she didn't look very happy about this public display of affection, she was never one to deliberately show her feelings to anyone, especially me, in public. Nevertheless, hugged Dee Dee and said, "I'm afraid I can't stay. I just stopped by to bring you a present and tell you I love you, and, of course, happy birthday." Donna's voice was pleasant enough, but she was staring intently at me. I didn't care anymore. And now, I didn't care if she understood the reason for her recent unhappiness or not. I just picked up the beer, took a sip, and put it on the table. Then I tapped the tablet screen, turned off ET, and then tapped the screen again to turn off the ET engine. Donna turned and started to walk away, and Dee Dee let go of her mother and came back to stand next to me. I guess it was one of those moments in her life when hugging her father around the waist while her friends stood around watching wasn't so cool anymore. As Donna reached the patio, Sandy Malloy came out the back door and shouted, "Who wants cake and ice cream?" The girls ran to the picnic table, which was set with paper plates and plastic utensils, and Sandy set the cake on the table. When they saw each other, Donna and Sandy froze for a moment, staring at each other. Then Donna looked back at me, leaned over, shook her head, cursed, clearly not caring that her daughter and friends could see, and headed for the house to her car, which I guessed was parked in front of the house. No, Sandy and I weren't a couple or anything like that. This wasn't one of those stories where a cheating husband has a bunch of divorced women or office girls, or even his wife's younger sisters, waiting for him to finally divorce his cheating wife. And while that would have been fine in other circumstances, this was different. Sandy was a single mother to 11-year-old Virginia, my daughter Dee Dee's friend. Sandy had gotten pregnant in high school but never married. Seeing that I was completely busy preparing for the party, she offered to stay and help. Over the past 3 years, Sandy had been to our house many times to drop off or pick up Ginny, or to participate in parent supervision at one of the then small girls' parties Ginny was invited to. Naturally, thanks to her daughter's close relationship with mine, Sandy knew more than I would have liked about the crisis in my marriage and its subsequent collapse last year. After Donna left, the girls joined Sandy, Diz, and me for cake and ice cream, then opened their presents and handed out a handful of small candies that they thought they had stolen some time ago after the incident with the fake piñata and its wet surprise. After that, Diz and I briefly told the girls about Alien and Enola Gay and demonstrated them while playing with 2 drones in the yard. Of course, these days the more acceptable term is unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, since the term drone has fallen out of use by civil rights activists who object to the use of military and police versions of these devices within the country and by nominal American citizens fighting terrorists against U.S. interests abroad. While the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, delayed approval and licensing of commercial UAVs until 2015 or even later, Diz and I conducted all the basic research and testing we could afford. We regularly maneuvered 2 UAVs at minimum altitude and on private land nearby to be at the forefront of the UAV business when the FAA restrictions were lifted. We may have broken a number of rules, but we told ourselves with a smile that we could continue as long as we remained literally under the radar. Ha ha. We also received foreign contracts and advances to produce new, and even more advanced, copies of the ET and Enola Gay from 2 cousins of Diz in India. These 2 brothers were already planning to implement drone delivery, unrestricted by Indian law. Here in the US, only the CEOs of Amazon.com and Domino's Pizza had publicly announced this. The 2 Indian entrepreneurs dreamed of becoming commercial leaders in Southeast Asia in the use of UAVs for remote sensing, electromagnetic, biological, and chemical. Commercial aerial film production was also a lucrative venture. Bollywood, the home of the Indian film industry, was already demanding their products. Add to that oil and gas exploration, and even mineral exploration, and mountain rescue operations. Many climbers from around the world needed emergency assistance while waiting to be rescued in the Himalayas. We talked about the possibility of making a lot of money, or rupees, depending on the circumstances. I was quite surprised by the size of the advance and the promise of generous compensation. After all, Diz and I had only been doing this since he finished his master's degree last year while interning in a UAV research program. The FAA had only given final approval for large-scale UAV research to 3 universities: Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Diz was involved in the UAF program when he started renting a room from us. Diz worked hard to earn his degree while interning at UAF test sites in Pendleton, just a few miles south of the Oregon-Washington border, and Tillamook on the Oregon coast west of Portland. He came to us at a time when Donna and I desperately needed some extra income for a short time and decided to rent out a room in our house. Diz was the first to respond to the ad, and although Donna was initially hesitant about renting to a foreign student on a student visa, she eventually agreed. Diz moved in a week after we first met. Since my house was in Woodland, Washington, not far from Vancouver and north of it along the Columbia River, we could get to Pendleton in about 3 hours and to Tillamook in 2 hours. Dees only went there during exam periods. The rest of the time he worked on his graduate coursework at my house, and after my divorce, I let him live there for free. Although Diz's name was Nirmal, everyone called him Diz, and he didn't seem to mind. I learned that Dizi is a Sanskrit term for the people, culture, and products of the Indian subcontinent or South Asia. From this, it was easy to guess that he could be called Dizzy or Diz. When someone first called him Diz, he paused for a moment, about 5 seconds, but then smiled and agreed, realizing that his acceptance of the nickname coincided with his acceptance by his new friends into our circle of friends and acquaintances. Before my divorce, I quietly resumed my relationship with Diz after he told me about a potential financial tsunami looming over the commercial drone industry. I was already having problems in my relationship with my then-wife Donna, especially financially. We had very different views on spending, saving, investing, and planning our financial future. So I quietly asked my lawyer to help me hide my investments in drone research and development, which Diz was now doing for his cousins after he was released from the non-disclosure agreement related to his college internship. I was glad that the terms of my divorce from this had been approved before the terms of my part of the business agreement with Diz and his cousins were finalized. This meant that any profits I made from my new venture were not included in the divorce settlement and did not go to Donna. After Dee Dee's birthday party ended, we drove one of Dee Dee's friends home. We were driving home. Dee Dee was sitting in the back seat. Dylan was sitting next to me, shaking his head and whispering something from time to time, listening to music on his smartphone and headphones. "Dad?" Dylan asked, tapping the screen of his phone to stop the music. "What does Elvis Presley mean when he says, 'There's no place like this'?" It took me a few seconds to shift my thoughts away from Dee Dee's birthday, Donna's brief visit and her somewhat stormy reaction, and the aftermath of Dee Dee's friend coming home. Now I realized what Dylan meant. "Oh, you mean the old song Return to Sender?" I asked. He nodded, and I continued. "Your grandfather Taylor, my father, probably told me about it when I asked him many years ago. He said that when he was a teenager, when Elvis was still alive, young, and at the height of his musical career, the United States hadn't yet introduced zip codes. Since most cities in America had only one post office, there was no need for them. But in large cities such as Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, there was more than one post office, and the cities were divided into delivery zones corresponding to the location of these post office buildings. I looked at him and saw that he was looking at the windshield and nodding knowingly. Then he asked me, "What does it mean when Elvis says he put a letter in the mailbox and sent it to Special Agent D?" I replied, "These days, when you send a letter or package with special handling instructions, the U.S. Postal Service classifies it as registered, certified, priority, express mail, or something like that. Before these services were available, any special handling instructions or requests for expedited delivery were classified as special delivery, or, as some people called it, and as you heard in the old Elvis song Special D." Dylan nodded again and continued listening to the music. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that Dee Dee had fallen asleep after yesterday's excitement and exhausting preparations for her birthday. I could understand her. I had to go through all of that with her, as well as all the nonsense with Donna showing up tonight. I pushed my annoyance with Donna aside, looked at Dee Dee with love, and thought, my little girl, yes, my little girl, is growing up just like her brother. Then my thoughts returned to Dylan's question about the Elvis song he heard on the Oldies channel on his smartphone's music streaming app. I suddenly laughed out loud, causing Dee Dee to open his eyes and look at me curiously in the rearview mirror. Turning my attention back to the road, I continued to chuckle, thinking about the line from the song again. Yes, I thought, remembering the most important message I had ever sent to my now ex-wife. I sent it to a special address D. The wedding was unexpected and unprepared. It took place just 2 weeks after Donna and I graduated from high school, and a couple of months after we turned 18. she in April and me in May. Donna was pregnant, and everyone thought it was my fault. Although I tried to refute my father's and Donna's claims that she had been seeing at least 4 other guys while we were together, my father asked me if I had really slept with Donna. When I bowed my head to avoid his disapproving gaze and nodded, he quoted an old, undocumented and unofficial, but still observed in some mountain communities, aphorism from redneck law. If the issuer of an invalid check cannot be found, the responsibility falls on the last endorser. In a week, I was supposed to kiss my fiancée. It wasn't difficult because I had wanted Donna for over a year and truly loved her, despite her obvious preference for flirting with all the boys in our class throughout our senior year. Besides, Donna Swinford was really beautiful. In fact, she had been the prettiest girl in our class since she moved up to second grade, and her feminine figure began to blossom. And she knew it. During her school years, Donna used her looks many times. She was considered the queen of the school. She captivated boys and destroyed other girls with her looks, comments, and behavior. There were rumors that she had even seduced several teachers to get good grades, but that was never confirmed. And as far as I know, she never told anyone about it. Everything else was common knowledge. After we were officially married, Donna's father offered us a small apartment above his garage while we tried to become parents, work, and get an education. After the baby was born, Donna's mother, although not particularly happy with our situation, was happy to look after Dylan during the day while Donna worked at her main job, and I attended college and worked part-time in the evenings several times a week. The beginning of our family life may not have been the best, but Donna and I were becoming a family, enjoying life together, and, as far as I could tell, even beginning to experience real love. At first, we struggled financially, but Donna and I both had pretty good jobs. Thanks to a raise I got after graduating college with a business degree and getting a job at a local company, we were able to breathe a little easier. During the first year of our life together, our sex life was amazing. I had never had sex as regularly as I did now that I was married. And Donna, who had loved sex even before we got married, seemed to really enjoy our sex life, at least that's how it seemed to me at the time. Less than 2 years later, our sexual activity began to gradually decline. We still got together often to fool around in bed, but I began to notice that sex was becoming less frequent. This coincided with Donna spending more time away from home, meeting friends at work, helping a friend organize Mary Kay parties for a small share of the organizer's fees, and attending a walking group for moms. Only in the last of these 3 cases was Donna able to keep Dylan occupied, as she could take him out in the jogging stroller we found at a store, along with other young moms and their kids from the group. In the other 2 cases, I stayed home with the baby and then with the toddler, or asked Donna's mom to help me when I was working or studying. Overall, our sex life had fallen to perhaps its lowest point since our wedding day, when one evening Donna approached me with a troubled look on her face. Dylan, who was 2 at the time, was playing with a stuffed dog at my feet while I was studying, and Donna finally spoke, sitting down at the table across from me. "Honey, I'm so sorry," she said quietly with a sad expression on her face. I needed to take my mind off the financial problem I was working on as homework for one of my courses, so I responded to her a few seconds later. "Honey, what are you sorry about?" I finally asked. "Glenn, I'm pregnant again." And I looked up in surprise, feeling genuine joy at the news. However, from the look on Donna's face, I knew that the situation did not bode well for her. "Honey, that's wonderful news," I said, standing up and walking around the table to hug her. She didn't get up right away. Instead, I took her hands and pulled her toward me to hug and kiss her. Her enthusiasm may not have waned when we started kissing, but eventually she responded to my tongue with hers. I tried to convey to her how happy I was at the prospect of becoming a father again. After all, Dylan had turned out to be a charming child and had not yet experienced the terrible twins we kept hearing about from our friends. A little less than 9 months had passed since the night Diane came into our family. Let me tell you, that little girl stole my heart from the moment the doctor cut her from her mother, wiped her down, wrapped her in a blanket, and handed her to me to put on the scale. Now I was an official member of the Squeeze Club as the father of my daughter, and at the time I didn't even know it. "Honey," I asked, stunned, "is something wrong?" Donna gathered her strength and looked at me strangely for a moment. Then she smiled through her tears and said, "Glenn, dear, I'm just very tired after giving birth, and my mind and body are exhausted from the medications and hormones that are trying to return to normal. I'm sorry for all the emotions." She continued to look at me strangely for a while. At that moment, I couldn't understand what was wrong. Of course, today, I know exactly what caused that emotional storm. However, at that moment, I thought there was something wrong with her words, but out of love for her and our two children, and also because of my own anxiety, I decided to believe her story. Donna, I know it's been hard. Right now, you're just relaxing and getting ready for tomorrow's trip home. Mom Swinford has everything ready for the kids and can't wait for us all to come home, especially little Dinah. I smiled at her with all the love I could muster at that moment. Donna looked at me and responded with a smile and a raised eyebrow, one of those non-verbal signals inviting a kiss. I complied, and we both giggled when we heard Dina stirring between us. Donna had her tubes tied after Diana was born, saying that 2 children were enough for her. We talked about it, and although I'm not one to close all avenues for expanding our family, I eventually agreed with her. 11 years later, almost to the day, I learned that we had been living a lie for a very long time. As I mentioned, after I graduated and got a good job, we began to feel that the financial burden we had been carrying until then had become lighter. We still had a lot of debt, but now it was under control. Banks like to divide debt into good and bad. Soon, we achieved such a balance between good and bad debt that, thanks to recent changes in banking legislation, we became eligible for a low-interest mortgage. We were also lucky enough to find a small but cozy house that was affordable, because the bank wanted to earn income from the property, which had been seized for debt when the house was abandoned during the divorce proceedings. Everyone was happy. The bank, because it was now earning money from the property, Donna and I, because we now had a place of our own, Mom and Dad Swinford, because we had finally moved out of their garage. Mom Swinford wasn't so happy because now she couldn't see Dylan and Dee Dee as often. When Dee Dee started kindergarten, Donna, after some hesitation on my part, successfully asked me to let her go back to work during the day while the kids were at school. She assured me that she would not allow our family time or special time with the kids or with me to suffer or be compromised. For the most part, she kept her promise. Around the time Dylan was about to start high school in the Vancouver area where we lived, Grandpa Taylor suffered a great loss. Grandma Taylor passed away. Sometime later, he called Dad and me and invited us to his house. "Tom," he said to my father, "I know you and Ruth love your home and don't want to move, so I want you to consider passing this house down to Glenn, from one generation to the next. It's in good condition and paid for." I expected my father to object to putting his father in a disadvantageous position, but he seemed to agree. After all, he and my mother weren't rich, but they were financially secure. I was still surprised and asked, "Grandpa, don't you want to stay here surrounded by memories of Grandma and you together?" "Son," Grandma Taylor said with a sad smile, "that's exactly why I have to leave here. These memories are so sweet that it makes me sad that she's not here to talk about them. No, I want you to keep this house for your young family. And I'll take the old wagon from the public storage and go on a trip to the places in the Northwest that I didn't get to see before I got old." So Donna, our 2 children, and I became the residents of my grandfather Taylor's house in Woodland, north of Vancouver. When we drew up the new purchase agreement, Grandpa Taylor insisted that it be in my name only. I didn't understand why he did that at the time, but now I'm glad he did. It made the house indivisible, in a way. If he hadn't, it would have been very difficult for me to fight for custody of the children after the divorce and win. Last year, Diz rented a room from us for about 8 months, when I noticed a change in his behavior. It took him a few weeks to warm up after his first visit, but after that, Donna and I could easily strike up a conversation with him. He was even surprisingly patient with the almost constant stream of questions from 13-year-old Dylan. Daisy had already come to terms with Dee's presence, but still seemed a little reserved around him. I noticed changes in Dis's behavior, but decided he was probably trying to solve some technical problem with the drones we were experimenting with. "Yes," I said. "That's what he's doing." The company I worked for regularly in Vancouver coordinated a fairly large catering operation for several airlines flying out of Portland International Airport in Oregon. PDX was located across the Columbia River from Vancouver, Washington, just 13 miles from Highway 14 and Interstate 205. Every day, our suppliers, chefs, packers, and transporters prepared, packaged, and delivered customized meals to PDX for flight attendants on large aircraft, who arranged the main courses and prepared vegetables in the aircraft galley ovens and distributed them throughout the cabin. We were proud to deliver high-quality, ready-to-serve meals at a very competitive price. The fixed operations coordinator at PDX agreed with this assessment and renewed our contract every year. As a result, we were a very profitable business. Part of the profits were distributed as periodic bonuses rather than salaries. As a department manager, I received surprisingly generous bonuses. As I mentioned earlier, early in our marriage, I realized that Donna and I had very different views on financial management. To prevent the bonuses from becoming a financial drain on my family, I took a number of protective measures. I found an advisory team consisting of two brothers, one of whom was a certified financial planner and the other a lawyer. They helped me create an investment portfolio and provided tax and legal advice as part of their services. When Diz's cousins made their offer via email and then Skype, I was finally convinced that investing in their venture could be very lucrative financially, and I was willing to take the risk. What I was not willing to do was share the financial benefits with Donna, as it was around this time that I learned about her secret life. In this case, my investment team helped me keep this investment venture a secret from Donna and also helped me meet the deadline before the divorce was finalized. Why did I hide this from my wife and not include it in the family budget, you ask? Because I finally convinced Des to tell me what was bothering him. Glenn, Diz said hesitantly, you know I was testing the camera on the first UAV that tracked and held position? When I nodded, still embarrassed by his awkwardness, he continued, well, now the stabilization software allows you to hold a moving object. Plus, Diz continued, with GPS positioning and a more powerful UAV motor, I can keep it in a fixed position on the ground for up to 4 hours. The video recording feature on the tablet controller lets you record even longer, but in this case, the determining factor is how long the aircraft can stay in the air. I knew these features were essential for wildlife conservationists tracking herds of bison, caribou, and moose. And the new quieter Wankel engines we had installed didn't make enough noise to scare away the subjects we were observing, while also satisfying environmental fanatics. Diz started talking about technical details that I didn't have a clue about, and I turned away. I sighed and touched his shoulder, making him turn back to me. Diz, don't get distracted. What's bothering you so much? I asked. You know I want to help in any way I can. I was still convinced that it was all about some complicated technical obstacles he had encountered. Although I couldn't be of much help with the technical aspects of our project, I was fully prepared to continue fulfilling my part of our partnership. Not only had I provided capital, but I had also offered Diz a place to live, a place to assemble and test his equipment, my garage, and, especially important for focused engineers prone to mood swings, support. Glenn, He paused and looked at me thoughtfully for a moment. Then he picked up the tablet remote. I'll show you. His eyes darted around as he said this, and he continued his strange comments, reverting to his old Indian speech patterns. But please don't blame the messenger. Diz took the tablet remote and played the saved video. At first, it was difficult to understand what I was watching. The movements were blurry and uneven. The video stabilization is working, he explained, zooming in on the tablet screen, and the moving images on the screen began to flow smoothly into one another. I watched as the ground beneath the UAV in the video moved across the 9-inch screen. I noticed that the grass and trees gave way to asphalt and concrete. Apparently, he was flying the UAV out of an area surrounded by fields and forests and into a more built-up area. I could have knocked on your window, but I didn't want to scare you or put the UAV in danger, he said with a smile. I still didn't understand what he was talking about. Then I realized what I was seeing on the screen. I was looking at myself. It was a video of me sitting at my desk talking on speakerphone in my office at work. I couldn't hear anything but the hum of drones, traffic noise, and other sounds typical of a business district. You filmed this right outside my office window, I exclaimed. Diz just nodded, continuing to watch me. I was impressed by the quality of the video. Of course, I smiled, realizing that our company needed to pay more attention to the details of the building's cleaning and maintenance contract. The window through which I was looking at myself outside was covered in dirt and desperately needed cleaning. I couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed to a rainbow of pastel and dark colors. The figures that had been in the normal video were now only visible in broad outlines. But the colors were strange. I felt like I was in the middle of a weather radar image on the Weather Channel. That's an infrared image, Diz said, anticipating my question. Now that I understood that I was watching a video in infrared light, I realized that the different colors actually represented different heat signatures. The window, because it was in direct sunlight, clearly distorted what was visible through it because it had its own heat signature. Diz, this is cool, I said with a smile. Environmentalists are going to love this when they're trying to track herds. Diz didn't respond. He pushed the tablet aside and activated another video file. He sighed and handed me the tablet so I could see. This time, the video started in infrared mode. From the outlines I could see, I realized that the UAV was hovering over a parked car, which, judging by the heat signatures, contained a driver and one passenger. I watched as the people got out of the car and moved toward the rear. Their movements were indistinguishable, but it could mean they were taking something out of the trunk. They moved away from the car, and I noticed that the angle of the video changed so that they remained in view. But the position of the UAV did not change. I had to go around the tree they were hiding behind after they took the blanket from the trunk, Diz muttered nervously. I noticed that his voice had taken on the sing-song intonation characteristic of the subcontinent. Diz sighed again as the screen switched from infrared to video. I could see that the video had been shot in daylight. Judging by the lighting, it was late morning or early afternoon. In addition, I saw my wife, Donna, naked in Dean Winston's arms. Winston was one of our high school classmates and was known as Hot Dog. He was also one of 3 or 4 guys Donna dated before we got married because she was pregnant with Dylan. Needless to say, a year before Diz's revelations, I wasn't thrilled that Dean Winston had returned to Vancouver after graduating from Boise State University and working in Seattle for several years. Not only that, but he now worked for the same company as Donna. What a disgusting turn of events. The moment Dean and Donna appeared naked on the screen, she was lying on her back on a blanket and he was between her thighs. Ready to get down to business, I turned away and whimpered. I shoved my hands in my pockets so I wouldn't hit anyone. Diz paused the video and pressed the tablet to his chest. I'm sorry, my friend, Diz said. I just wanted to test the tracking and surveillance features on easily recognizable people and objects. So I used you and your wife as test subjects so you could see how well our system works. When I started, I never imagined that. Diz stopped himself and fell silent because I wasn't listening to him anymore. After about 3 minutes of silence in the room, broken only by the heavy sound of exhaled air, I finally spoke. Is that all you've got? I asked. Diz paused for a few seconds, then said, I have 3 more recorded incidents, but there have been others. Silence fell again. After about 30 seconds, I asked, and every time it's pretty much the same. I didn't really want to know, but at that point I couldn't help asking. After all, my thoughts had already turned to divorce. No, Diz replied. Based on the other 3 videos and other incidents I've observed, they take a long lunch break together and drive to this quiet area near Vancouver. They usually stay in his car and... Here, he simply tapped the screen to start another video. I noticed that the brightness and contrast in this video were completely different. That's because of the rain, Diz said. I nodded. Yes, it rains a lot in Vancouver and Portland in the spring. I understood why they'd wanted to stay in Dean Winston's car when they had their own cars. Damn, I remember Winston bragging about his new car with the huge panoramic sunroof. Some cars had a solid glass roof. Others had several panels. All were designed to open up the entire interior to the sun and tilt back, exposing at least part of the interior to the outside. Some enjoyed the wind in their hair. Others just sat and looked at the stars in the evenings. Of course, during the rain, which was quite common here in the Vancouver and Portland area, the panoramic roof still allowed you to enjoy the view without having to endure the rain on your face or, in the case of the ladies, on your hair. Dean Winston had a Chrysler 300S with all the options, including a double panoramic sunroof, which he loved to brag about. Yes, ladies love to have sex in the luxury of my car, enjoying the beauty of the sun and stars above their heads. I heard him say that at least twice at work. Parties Donna forced me to attend. I never heard my wife mention Dean, and I never saw her do anything at those parties that would make me suspicious. I think the 2 of them, my wife and her longtime lover, had learned to hide the signs of infidelity well. When Diz handed me the tablet so I could see my whore wife's betrayal, I noticed that the heat signatures showed they were doing something similar to how people get naked in the front seat of a car. They were kissing frequently. Finally, I saw the passenger move to the back seat and assume what I believed to be a doggy-style position. The driver then moved between the front seats and joined the other person in the back seat, who appeared to have approached the passenger from behind. The fluctuations in heat signatures and the movement of the car confirmed what was happening. Before they moved to the back seat, I didn't notice any signs that the driver was trying to do anything else in the groin area, so I assumed it was non-consensual sex, which is, of course, terrible. Not only was my shitty wife cheating on me, but she was also putting my health and possibly my life at risk by exposing us both to who knows how many of this son of a bitch's sexual partners. Diz, I finally said, I need copies of those videos. It looks like my soon-to-be ex-wife and I are going to have a fight over her, shall we say, extramarital affairs. I'm going to need those videos when I go to court for custody of the kids. Diz nodded and said, considering her past, are you sure? He suddenly fell silent, but I knew what he meant. Were these children mine? That would have to be verified with biological tests. But in terms of love, it didn't matter. My children were my children. I didn't care who the biological donor was. I loved Dylan and Dee Dee, and they loved me. I wouldn't give them up without a serious fight, and even then, I wouldn't rest until I got them back. Still, Diz was right. Yeah, I guess I should get a DNA test, shouldn't I? I'm sorry, my friend, Diz said apologetically. I nodded and put my hand on his shoulder encouragingly. The last clip wasn't over yet, and I sighed. Hey, Diz, I said, feeling anger rising in my soul but keeping it out of my voice. Do you have any real videotapes that aren't related to these cases? Diz, with a proud look on his face, stopped the current video and turned on another one. This time, the video played normally, and you could see their heads and faces from behind and slightly above the back of Winston's car. Only a few seconds passed before the image changed again to infrared, directly above the car. I looked at Diz with a questioning look on my face. I hid behind the car for a few seconds to get a clear shot, Diz replied. However, I was only able to keep the UAV there for a few seconds, just enough time to get a clear shot, before I disappeared from their field of view. I didn't want to alert them to the presence of the UAV and the camera. I mean, you know how much effort you and I have put into this program? She's seen some of the demonstrations we've done here. She would have recognized the drone immediately if she had seen it, and realized that it was probably filming. When Diz revealed his secret, I had already crossed the threshold of logical thinking in the situation I found myself in today. Now I was operating on an emotional level. I was suffering on a personal level, but I was also worried about my children. But most of all, I felt anger and bitterness because of the two yays in the video. My loving wife. Not only did she cheat on me, but she also put me in physical danger by allowing that bastard to do that to her without a condom. I was furious at the contempt and disrespect with which she had conducted her affair. Yes, divorce is one thing. Revenge is quite another. My lawyer, Myrna Hawk, had already prepared all the paperwork by the time Diz and I finally realized that today was payback day. Sounds like the title of a movie, doesn't it? I inquired, and Diz confirmed that the adulterous rendezvous took place on Fridays, at noon. He told me that it always took place during the extended lunch break on Fridays. The informal dress code allowed them to wear clothes that were easier and quicker to put on and take off. And sometimes on Tuesdays, the least busy day of the week. I gave Myrna Hawk copies of the videos that Diz had already given me, recorded on DVDs, and asked her questions necessary to determine how best to help my wife so that this would be as painful and humiliating as possible. She informed me that she could deliver documents anywhere within a 20-mile radius of Woodland, and even to the northern edge of Vancouver, where Donna's work was located, within an hour, and to the recipient's door within 2 hours. I printed out one photo of the happy couple having sex in the missionary position on a blanket under the trees. I would include this photo in the divorce papers. The DVD with the videos remained in Myrna Hawk's office as a precaution. Meanwhile, I secretly took swabs and hair samples from both of my children, the former while they were asleep, the latter from the combs and brushes on their mirrored dressers. The results came back in just a few weeks. I listed Myrna Hawk's office address as the return address. And there I was, sitting in Myrna's small conference room, when I discovered that Dylan was actually my son. Wow. It seemed that Dad and Mr. Swinford had been right to make me marry Donna back then. My hand was shaking slightly as I looked at the second set of results. Donna wasn't mine. Well, biologically. She would always be mine if I could have prevented it. I loved my girl too much to lose her because of some scheme my future ex-wife had probably concocted. The second result hardened my heart even more. The Winston affair was clearly not the first time she had spread her legs for another man while married to me. She, who was supposed to belong only to me, was clearly some kind of bus stop for her lovers. They could come and go as she scheduled them so I wouldn't find out. The day of revenge had to be chosen carefully, depending on the weather on the chosen Friday. In fact, Diz and I had to wait another 4 weeks, and at the same time replenish our video archive before the right day appeared on the horizon. It was May, and the weather forecast for the coming Friday was not only mostly sunny, but also promised surprisingly low humidity, 15%. If the couple didn't get out of the car, they would most likely carry out their feet in the back seat with the panoramic roof open. Everything depended on the weather. But Diz and I were ready for anything. "Oh, Glenn, are you sure? That's disgusting," Diz complained. We were busy pouring the contents of the bucket into one of several special weather probes I had found at a military surplus store. We were testing the bombing capabilities of the UAV, now called Enola Gay. Diz had designed an explosive device based on compressed CO2, and we filled one of the balloons with water. Diz carefully inserted the explosive device into the filled balloon, after which I sealed it and took the cable outside. We wrapped several turns of fabric tape around the seal and made a loop. This loop would be used to attach a remotely activated grabber for delivering pizza to the underside of the Enola Gay UAV. A single tap on the tablet controller's screen would trigger the gripper and release the payload on command. When the balloon descended low enough to create sufficient tension on the slack drive cable, the explosive device released CO2 in the form of a sudden burst of water, or whatever was in the balloon at that moment. I insisted that we conduct 3 test launches with water balloons in the yard. We conducted the last 2 rehearsals with a UAV with alternating strobe lights, which we now called ET, in honor of the famous movie in which the spaceship that delivered and picked up the main character had many flashing lights. "Of course," I replied to Diz's question. "I want them to be in deep shit. Literally." As I said this, I poured more and more of the disgusting mixture of urine and shit into the large weather balloon. I was inspired to do this by a car trip when, feeling sorry for myself, I pulled into a small parking lot belonging to the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission. This primitive place, which had retained its greenery and pristine nature, as the local tree huggers like to say, had a toilet that was just as primitive as the chemical toilets found in most modern places. I grinned when the idea of revenge dawned on me. As I filled the balloon, I, like Diz, did not forget to put on surgical gloves. Next to us was a bucket with a mixture of bleach and water, as well as some kind of disinfectant. After we filled the balloon, we wanted to carefully seal it and hang it on a hook in the garage while we dipped our hands in the cleaning mixture. It would have been hell for Diz and me if, after taking revenge on the scammers, we had contracted hepatitis or something else just as terrible. We also had to be careful not to overfill the balloon. Previous versions of the water balloons were a little fuller to provide extra strength for the weight and mass of the cargo that would be delivered in reality. Now all that was left to do was wait another hour or so for Dean Winston and my wife Donna to return from work for their weekly Friday afternoon sex session. I walked over to the control tablet and started the ET's engine about 10 minutes before the scammers usually left the building. After 30 seconds of warming up, I lifted ET out of its hiding place in the treetops on the opposite side of the parking lot from the building where my wife worked. I practiced with the camera mounted under ET using a suspension system and got pretty good at changing the camera's orientation as the platform moved. When I left ET in hover mode, I practiced moving the camera and zooming to make sure the mount wouldn't jam at the wrong moment. I wanted to be sure I captured all the painfully awkward moments. I couldn't help but marvel at the fact that I was more than 13 miles away from where ET had watched my wife work. Alibi? You bet. As expected, Donna and Dean walked out the door leading to the parking lot together and right on time. They didn't even seem to notice what their coworkers thought of this, which probably explained the poor guy looks I'd been getting from some of my wife's coworkers at recent work meetings. "Okay, Diz, we know where they're going. Let's load up Enola Gay," I said to my friend. With that, we carefully removed the air-filled cylinder from the hook in the garage. There was a moment when I almost dropped it, but we stopped. I calmed my heartbeat down to 650 beats per minute and carried the cylinder to Enola Gay. Then I left that job to Diz. He was an expert at installing the hopper's thrust activator and the suspension mechanism for transporting cargo. I returned to monitoring the ET and moving it into position. I must have been so focused on the lesson that I didn't even notice that the Enola Gay had already taken off until Diz sat down next to me with the controller tablet in his hands. We looked at each other, shook fists, and then refocused our attention on the screens in front of us. The view from above of Dean Winston's moving Chrysler quickly became boring, but the excitement of what we were doing energized us and helped us focus. The drive to Donna and Dean's favorite parking spot took no more than 10 minutes, and today was no exception. Diz grinned next to me and whispered, "Oh yeah." When I asked what he meant, he smiled and said, "Look at the sunroof." Turning my camera and zooming in a little to get a better look, I saw that Winston had opened the panoramic roof of his luxury car so they could enjoy the spring breeze during the ride. I silently prayed that they would leave it open. It had rained during the night, so the ground was very wet. However, today the weather was perfect. Around 15 degrees, mostly sunny, and the humidity had left the area for the time being. The conditions were just right for our purposes. As soon as the car stopped, the couple got out and saw that the ground was too wet to do this in the clearing under the trees. They began to enjoy themselves. Damn, I thought. She's still a fox, even when she bends over. I noticed that Dean Winston's equipment was in the golden mean category. Not too big and not too small, just noticeable. Not suitable for living in. I watched and clenched my teeth as my wife, whom I had been with for almost 15 years, opened the back door of the car and got inside. I started the car and filmed the moment when Dean leaned over and kissed my wife. I couldn't help but wipe the sudden moisture from my eyes. This marriage had been dying since I discovered Donna's duplicity, but the date had not yet been set. Now it was set. Today was the day. I moved the ET out of the sight and told Diz to start running. From that point on, I slowly and carefully moved the ET below my line of sight and behind the curve of the trunk of the car where the scammers were now entertaining themselves. I was on the verge of fainting when I heard Diz turn on the alarm. "Great!" he almost shouted. Coming to his senses, he said, "Last run. Strobe and arrow at 3, 2, 1." And then in a calm voice, just above a whisper, he said, "Now." I raised the ET to the level of the rear window. I had time to notice the expressions on the couple's faces when I turned on the strobes first, then the police siren. Today, I covered the strobes with dark blue tape. When the bright flashing lights went out, I smiled briefly, thinking about what must be going through the couple's minds. The light resembled the headlights of a police car. Woo-woo. This sound is almost universally recognized as a police signal in the United States. As planned, the surprised couple stopped and froze in place for a few seconds. Their astonished expressions were captured on video by the IT department. I smiled at their awkwardness and congratulated myself on surprising them so well that I almost didn't hear Diz. "Oh, the bombs have been dropped." To be honest, I wasn't expecting anything as disgusting as what I saw on the video from the IT department. The movement in the car behind the couple in my viewfinder looked as if something had fallen through the sunroof, but it lasted only a split second, after which the rear window, except for the area covered by the couple's heads and shoulders, was covered with a disgusting brown film. It took the couple a split second to realize that they were now covered in a brown haze of urine and soft shit, as was the entire interior of Dean Winston's expensive Chrysler 300s. When Diz's device exploded, they were looking out the rear window, so there was minimal urine on their faces, just traces of feces from the car's ceiling. So Diz and I planned the attack. I had to make sure they were looking away from the exploding ball of shit so it didn't get in their eyes. We didn't want to blind them, or in their noses or mouths. We didn't want them to swallow a single drop. It's one thing to tell someone, "Eat shit and shut up." It's quite another to realize that if they eat that crap, they could get so sick they die. I wanted revenge, not to worry about being charged with murder. "The rounds are over," Diz said suddenly in an authoritative voice. Then in a softer tone, he said, "I think it's time to go, my friend." With that, we drove the Enola Gay and the ET away from the scene, keeping as low as possible. 20 minutes later, we delivered them home and congratulated each other over Budweiser Black Crown beers. Diz left at my request, leaving me at home to wait for Donna's inglorious return. I turned ET back on to watch the main road turn into our neighborhood, and when I saw the Chrysler turn, I quickly drove the car back and parked it in the garage. I had already warned Myrna Hawk to have her bailiff nearby and on standby for 10 minutes. She gave me his cell phone number. I entered it and pressed the button to get him to do his job, just as my wife's lover pulled up in his car outside our house. My car was parked across the street so Donna wouldn't know I was home. I have to admit that Winston's Chrysler was a nice car, at least on the outside. When he parked, there were still brown streaks on the inside of the windshield. He must have wiped them off with a t-shirt or something so he could see the road. When the passenger door opened, an exhausted figure peered out. Donna's face was cleaned of the dirt that had obviously permeated Dean's car, including all the clothes they had folded in the front trunk while they were doing their thing in the back seat. I realized this when I watched the Enola Gay video while Dean and I were drinking beer after the operation. Dean's aim was phenomenal. The dirty ball hit the car right in the center through the open sunroof, and the funnel released its disgusting contents just a couple of inches above the center console between the front seats. Enola Gay's camera captured the effect of a brown explosion that spread almost instantly throughout the car, even into the trunk where their clothes were folded. Thanks to the focus set by Diz, only a relatively small amount flew out through the sunroof. The guy was really very talented at this. I saw another dark car pull up to the curb. The driver got out and headed for my porch. He was in his 20s or 30s and was carrying a large manila envelope. He quickly crossed the yard and caught up with Donna before she could climb the steps. I had broken the window in the front room, so the sound carried both ways, from the street into the house and vice versa. He approached Donna and began the formal introductions. "Donna," I smirked. He started again, fighting the awful smell that must have been emanating from Donna in every direction. "Donna Taylor?" he asked, and it sounded like he was trying to breathe through his mouth and speak at the same time. God, that smell must have been really awful. "Yes, but I can't talk right now." She said, trying to push him away. God bless him, he didn't give up and just said, "Here." I looked out the window and saw Donna take the envelope he handed her. It must have been a reflex. Then he quickly walked over to his car and shouted to Donna Taylor, who was walking behind him. "Donna Taylor, you have been served with a court summons." Without getting out of his car, he took a photo of her with his phone to document the event, and also noted the date and time the summons was served. The guy was thorough, even though he clearly didn't like my smelly wife. You have to give him that. Winston immediately wanted to leave. He probably wanted to get away from his ex-lover, take a shower, find a mechanic who would dare to repair the car, or an arsonist who would simply set it on fire and put it out of its misery and get on with his life, as the weekend was approaching. It took him a few minutes to get out of my driveway because the bailiff's car was partially blocking his way. The clerk took another envelope out of the car and walked over to the driver's door of Dean Winston's car. I couldn't hear, but it seemed to me that after confirming Dean's identity, the clerk simply threw the envelope out the window, stepped back to take a photo, and drove away. Apparently, the smell near the car was as intoxicating as it was near Donna. I moved away from the window so Donna wouldn't see me watching the events unfolding in my yard. I could hear her sobbing. I don't know if it was sobs of anger, sadness, self-pity, or a little of everything. All I know is that they were loud. After that, I heard a few more sobs. She tried the key and found that it no longer worked. I had taken advantage of the morning to change the locks and replace the garage door opener before my mission of revenge began. She didn't know if I was home, but she rang the doorbell anyway and listened. She knocked on the door several times and kicked it once. Then I heard her open the door and sit down on the porch. There was silence for a minute. Then I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. I turned off the sound so she wouldn't hear that I was home. Before answering the call, I went to the kitchen. "What?" Usually when I saw her number on the display, I would answer, "Hi, honey," or some other term of endearment. But not this time. "Glenn. Honey, something terrible has happened and She fell silent and began to cry loudly and pitifully. I stayed on the line, and after a minute she finally gathered her strength. "Oh, Glenn. I can't get into the house, my key doesn't work, and I really need to take a shower and clean myself up." Ugh. I almost laughed, imagining her sitting on the porch crying and feeling her shit-soaked clothes rubbing against her. Finally, I spoke. "Donna, did you get the package I sent you?" Yes, she replied. "What is it?" "The rude guy who delivered it said I was serviced." "What did he mean?" I couldn't believe she hadn't figured it out. "Well, I guess you'll have to open it and see what he meant," I said. I couldn't help sounding harsh. I heard her open the envelope, probably holding the phone in the hollow between her neck and chin. "Glenn, why are you being so rude all of a sudden?" "Oh, no. No. I instructed Myrna Hawk to make sure that the photo of Donna and Dean having sex in the missionary position on a blanket on the ground was the first one in the divorce papers. From this angle, it would appear to an observer that a tall man with a camera took this photo from a distance of about 10 meters using a zoom lens. The secret of the drone video will remain known only to a few of us. Contrary to most people's expectations, the divorce did not go entirely in my favor. Perhaps the infidelity of the spouses helped. I don't know. Since Washington state does not require a period of separation before divorce, the process worked out fairly quickly. I got the house because it was in my name only, but I had to give Donna a number of financial assets from known accounts. This included only minimal child support for 2 years, as she was essentially continuing to work. Since I owned the house, the judge ruled that the children's interests would be served if the existing parenting arrangement is changed only to the extent necessary to address the changed relationship between the parents and the children or to protect the children from physical, mental, or emotional harm. In plain language, this meant that they had to stay in the house with me so as not to change the pattern of interaction. To Donna's credit, she did not try to portray me as physically, mentally, or emotionally abusive. If she had tried, I would have provided Myrna Hawk with a list of witnesses who would have confirmed that I was not abusive. I couldn't completely remove Dylan and Dee Dee from Donna's influence because the court also established joint decision-making rights, which meant that Donna could still have a significant influence on the children's lives. Well, I guess considering how courts usually treat fathers and the fact that I wasn't pushed out of the car, I could give Donna some leeway without being too picky. Of course, it would have been nice to no longer have to deal with my ex-wife, but I still had Dylan and Dee Dee. So far, I had protected them from the fallout of their parents' breakup. I planned to keep them in the dark for as long as possible. Donna rented an apartment a few miles from home. Guess who had to pay for it? It was closer to Vancouver in her job. It annoyed me that I had to pay for her cable TV. I checked to see if her package included the Cheater channel, but no luck. I didn't care if Donna was seeing someone or trying to start a new relationship. The subject never came up during the usual child visitation exchanges, and I didn't ask. In any case, I suffered financially for about 6 months until the income from the business that his cousins and I were running in India started coming in. The most surprising thing was that we didn't have to manufacture anything. We were simply the ideologists and intermediaries in deals that led to the production, custom orders, and transportation of Diss's designs. We had to hire another lawyer to handle the export deals because our designs were still not approved for commercial use in the US, and there were several trade restrictions on the export of technology. But when the FAA went off the rails and refused to grant us permission to fly in the US, the sky, literally, became the limit. Finally, I received a small financial boost when the court ruled in my favor in a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress IIED against Dean Winston. It turned out that this man was deeply in debt, and the final amount paid to me after paying my lawyer's fees and other expenses was only $43,000. That wasn't bad. Meanwhile, I was still making good money at my day job. A few months after the divorce, life was looking up. However, I started to get a little worried. I chuckled when I learned that the insurance agent handling Dean Winston's case refused to total the car, insisting on a thorough cleaning and restoration. Like Dean, I knew he would never get the smell of shit out of the upholstery. Dean continued to claim that the police officer was there when the hooligans vandalized his car. He insisted that the camera mounted on the police car should have captured some evidence to back up his story. Calls to the State Patrol and the Clark and Cowlitz County Sheriffs, asking for the name of the cop or his deputy who might have been there, got us nowhere. Diz and I kept quiet about the explosion. We didn't say or do anything that might arouse suspicion until Donna witnessed our little display at Dee Dee's party and finally connected the dots. I put Dee Dee to bed after we got back from taking her friend home. Dylan went to his room and probably sat on the internet before finally falling asleep. "Did you enjoy your 12th birthday, sweetie?" I asked Dee Dee as she tucked herself under the covers. In a few months, I would probably no longer be a welcome guest in her room during her evening bedtime rituals. She was definitely growing up fast. "Yeah, right," she said quietly, pretending to be desperate. "I'm not your baby." She giggled. I couldn't hold it in. I started to cry quietly. She saw my tears and said, "Daddy, I didn't mean to. I just wanted—" "Sweetheart," I said, hugging her with the blanket, "you'll always be my girl." She hugged me back and said, "I know, Daddy. I know." I kissed her forehead, and when she lay back down, I looked into her eyes and said, "You're so special, Dee." She smiled at me and closed her eyes. The DNA test results confirming that I was not the father of this little girl will never see the light of day if I can help it. I couldn't know for sure, but given how insistent Donna was that I had given her the name, the likelihood that Dean Winston had fathered Diana when he came home from school in Boise all those years ago was pretty high. Perhaps it was Donna's way of teasing me when we were alone. I don't think she told Winston about it, even if she knew he might have been Diana's biological father. Otherwise, she would have had to answer questions about her other lovers. And that would probably have come up when he tried to dispute my claims about him. But now it didn't matter. My children were with me, and the fickle ex-prostitute was out of the house. I went downstairs and looked at the clock, noticing that it was only 10 minutes past 10. I didn't usually answer calls after 9, but the answering machine picked up. I had always considered it rude to call home after 9 in the evening unless it was an emergency. However, today, when the phone rang at 9:15, I decided for some reason to answer. I was surprised and delighted to hear the voice on the other end of the line. Sandy Malloy's voice sounded clearly pleased in my ear. "Well, Glenn, don't you want to tell me why your ex hit you so hard? Remember, I said this wasn't one of those stories where the cheating guy already has a bunch of women lined up when he finally divorces his unfaithful wife. Well, I guess I was wrong. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and check out the next video.